Dune Prophecy has now ended. Dune Part 2 is one of my favorite movies of all time, and I can say that Dune Prophecy was a huge disappointment. So let's talk about it. No, yes, I thought Dune Prophecy was a huge disappointment. Especially coming off of Dune Part 2 and then having Dune Prophecy come at the end of the year. It's not really exactly something that you would want releasing in the same year from each other. But before I say everything bad about the show, let's talk about everything I liked. I can say the story in here is interesting. It was interesting enough for me to come back every single week and to see where it continues. And certain twists they had in here too, I was a fan of. I enjoyed some of the twists that this series had throughout it, and where it ended off at, I was satisfied with. Now, I am not familiar with this book, so I didn't really know the story going into it like I did for Dune Part 1, Dune Part 2, and the miniseries. I knew the stories for those because I only read the Frank Herbert books. I haven't read the other authors' books that's related to Herbert, but seeing the story for the first time unfold was also interesting to see. Now, the visuals for the show is definitely something to admire. Nowhere near the level of the movies because that's the movie budget, but the show is able to handle its budget and still act like you're in the world of Dune. It still looks like you're there on the planet with these characters, and it looks real. Even for a TV show, they put budget into this movie, and you can just tell from looking at shots of the movie that just looks like you're on that planet. I also like the world building of the show. We're able to see how the sisterhood works. We're able to see how different parts work 10,000 years before the birth of Paul Atreides. And I just like the world building because just taking it back 10,000 years before Paul was born kind of just shows different stuff. Because in episode 1, we see a small robot, but everyone's afraid of it because they're almost wiped out by robots. The war ended before this. Just from seeing the smallest thing made of robot is huge. It's part of the world building. It's also a key factor for this world. And seeing small moments like that really add to the story and the world of Dune. And this show is made for the hardcore Dune fans. The ones that absolutely love the books, absolutely love the world of Dune, and just love the mythology of it all. So if you're an absolute hardcore Dune fan, read every single book, not just by Frank Herbert, but every other thing too, if you're a die-hard fan of all of that, this show is 100% for you. But I was not. And I feel like most people are not as well. So let's talk about everything I didn't like about this show. Like I said, this show was a massive disappointment. This felt like a chore to watch every single week. There were some weeks where I completely forgot about this show entirely until I remembered, oh wait, it's Sunday. Dune Prophecy's out. We just watch this and forget about it. Like I always forgot about the episodes right after I watched it, and every time we came back every week, it just felt like a chore to watch because it just felt like I was interrupting something else I could be doing. I could have been doing something better with my time, but instead I spent my time watching this for an hour straight every single week. Now this show felt like Lord of the Rings of Power to me. For me, that show was so bad I didn't even get past the 3rd episode of season 1 and never even bothered to watch season 2. Now for me, this show felt exactly like that show. But this show was just a little bit more interesting to come back every single week because the story was just interesting enough to come back every single week. Lord of the Rings wasn't. I just felt like such a chore to get through it. And then once I did get through it, it wasn't really anything satisfying that happened in the episode. The story is interesting, but the episodes are boring. They do a good job at hooking you at the start of the episode and at the end of the episode so you come back next week, but everything else in the middle of the episode, there's almost nothing interesting in there. It spends time fleshing out the story, fleshing out the world, fleshing out these characters, but none of it is interesting. It takes so long just to do each individual thing that by the time we get to the main part of the episode, you're just wanting the episode to end, and you don't want to be there anymore. And it felt like that every single week I came back to watch this show. I always tried to give it a chance. I went in with the lowest of low expectations, but still came out disappointed every single week. There was an interesting story in there. There was a cool moment in each episode, but I also have to keep in mind all the slow parts of the episode, and the slow parts of the episode were always about 90% of the show. And the show's trying to make you care for the characters throughout all 6 episodes. I didn't care for a single one of them. You spend most of your runtime trying to get the audience to care for your characters, and then by the end of the show, you still do not care for the characters. That's a huge con right there, because this show is about 6 hours long. And if you still don't care for the characters by the end of this show, you have a massive problem there. And we're getting a season 2, and I still don't care for the characters. Now, I do think some characters are interesting, but not interesting enough to actually care about them. When stuff does happen to these characters, I don't care what is happening to them. You didn't do a good job at trying to make me connect to them in any way, shape, or form, so why would I care if something happened to them? I don't know if it's just that Frank Herbert has a certain style with his stories or not, but the book this show is based on is not made from Frank Herbert, so could that be the reason why the story isn't as good as the other stuff? Because the story is just not investing in any way. I do not care what is happening. Well, it's interesting. It's an interesting story, but you're not invested into it. You're hooked moments to make you come back, but it's not investing enough. So I don't really know the reason of why it's not investing enough. Now, it could be that we're missing Denis Villeneuve in here, and his style that he brought to Dune Part 2 and Dune Part 1 is entirely missing in here. Missing everything he did and added to his own Dune stuff. That just doesn't feel the same without him. Same thing goes for Hans Zimmer too. The score in here is nowhere near as good as the score in Dune. Dune for me is some of the best score in a movie I ever listened to. So when you have a project that doesn't have the same music in it, it just feels outside. It doesn't feel connected to that project. That's basically what this whole show is. It just doesn't feel connected to the Dune movies because it's missing the style of these two people that helped so much with those movies. Now I get it's 10,000 years before Paul Atreides, but it is still the same world. It still needs to feel like the same world, but it doesn't, and it's just missing all that style that those movies had. It just feels so disconnected from it all. Overall, Dune Prophecy was a massive disappointment. You're basically taking out almost everything you liked about the Dune movies because it feels so disconnected from all of that. And the story is so uninteresting, but it was interesting enough to come back every single week just to see how it ends, even though you didn't care for the characters. Nice world building, nice visuals, and like I said, interesting story, but I don't really think Dune Prophecy is worth checking out. But anyways, if you like this review, maybe these videos on this side will interest you too. Like, subscribe, and see you guys next time. Goodbye.